Hello Crazyhouse chess fans, it's GM Max here, and welcome to our game of TheFinnisher, playing as white against MiniGreat, who is on a peak of very high 2400s rating. Now, TheFinnisher is known as a player from Finland who has extremely good Crazyhouse opening knowledge, very deep knowledge, and also very good understanding of the game. And in this game, we're going to see how to play the Alekhine piece sack line decline, because I think the most obvious question that comes up for most people is probably, well, Max, what if Black simply puts an eye on e4 and just says, well, I'm just going to play with the knight in the center. And this game shows quite convincingly why this line is probably very good for white, because here TheFinnisher played the move f3, which of course is a bit different in that, of course, with Black's move order, he is hoping that, well, after knight e4, knight c3, and knight c6, well, bishop b5 is still possible, but arguably if White's knight commits c3, well, White has lost a few options along the way, so it becomes a more respectable approach for Black. For example, you might see something like, let's say, bishop d7, knight g2, e6, castles, and then it's theoretical line where Black can go knight takes c3, hoping for b takes c3 and knight takes c5 to try to win a pawn with a fork trick. But if White goes knight c3, Black can then play knight takes d4. And then this very interesting piece sack line with takes, queen d4, and then pawn h3, where Black basically gives up a piece, but manages to get quite good play on the light squares. I think objectively speaking, probably if White knows to move bishop h5, there have been a lot of engine games that have shown this is probably a lot better for White, but still the play is quite sharp enough, say takes, and moves like knight at c6 or bishop at b6. Well, the game is still very much open and anything can certainly happen from this point. So anyway, I could go deeper, but let's see how TheFinnisher basically shows why knight e4, even though it's a move that I have scored very well with my own games, I think it is objectively very good for White. Black played to move bishop to f5, and I think actually it's probably more precise to play knight c6 and to play the piece sack in this version, so that you have the pressure against the d4 pawn. It is true you do allow bishop to b5 in this case, but I think that now by playing a move such as bishop to d7 or even e6, well, this is, I think, a position that can be, let's say, almost playable for Black. Because if White goes knight 2, it'll often be drops like pawn at f3, causing some problems for White's kingside, which has been quite open. But if knight c3, you can also bluff with moves like knight e5. Well, actually, it's not that much of a bluff, because if they do take everything on b5, well, their king ends up being very exposed. I'll play it on the board, because it might not be so easy for everyone to follow the moves in their head. So d5 would be a blunder, because of takes, and, well, in this case, could even play to move pawn at f2, actually, and basically deflect the king away from the defense of the queen, and, well, that's just very bad news for White from here. So therefore, instead, after this, it's better for White to play a move like bishop takes d7. And White is up a piece and objectively probably has a very good position. But Black can play moves like e6, put the bishop on d5 or the bishop on g6. And because of the open position of White's king, it's a position that, okay, objectively I think White is significantly better, but in a practical game, Black has some chances to swindle, which I mean is some of us you can really ask for with Black in Crazyhouse if White plays very well in the opening. Well, instead, Black played bishop f5, we had takes and pawn takes. And the next move is one that's kind of very hard to play, I think, as White, if you haven't studied it beforehand. But it turns out the move pawn to g4 that TheFinnisher played is very strong here. Because, well, in the game, Black played bishop g6, which is, I think, the best try. If the bishop were to go back, well, White is simply going to pick up this pawn, moves like pawn at d5. And it's going to give White too fast a development, and Black doesn't really get anything real for the piece there, without any drops to follow up. So he plays bishop g6, trying to keep this pawn alive, but now a very strong move, and again, one that shows White's impressive preparation even in these sort of sidelines. In fact, I want to see if you can find this move as White, to see if you can play like TheFinnisher here with White to play. Okay, well done if you came up with the move e6. Now, to be fair, there are other moves like bishop e3 that probably are also quite good for White, just developing normally. But what makes e6 very effective is that now we see that Black's light square is very weak and allows White to take over the initiative. He played the move knight c3 in the game, which I think is very natural. I mean, if Black were to play, like one move that Black can try if he wants to complicate is a move like pawn at d3, trying to get the d4 pawn and a pawn at f2 or something. But actually, White has a nice little exchanging combination to neutralize this attack and take back the initiative. And a move like bishop e3 and keeping the tension is probably okay too, but tactically the move knight e4 is very strong. The point being that if Black takes, you then put the pawn on f7, and with either king f7, knight g5, or king d7, knight c5, well, either way, you've got a fork that is going to get you back your piece. And in the arising position, we can kind of say that, well, black's Goliath squares are very weak. White's got a nice lead in development, and that basically gives white decisive advantage here with normal play. So the move knight c6 was tried instead, and then bishop e3 just consolidates the center, and we see that black's 2 pawns in the hand are not actually doing all that much for him at the moment. You know, maybe the best try for black might be something like trying to put a pawn down on some square, but it's not so easy because pawn at d3 you can sort of just take, and I don't really believe in putting the pawn f4. I think if white just takes, I think it sort of is nothing for black. And if you put the pawn f3, then a very thematic idea in these positions is just to sack the piece back, so that way you get rid of their pawns, and you also get the pawns in hand that you can potentially drop. You know, probably you'll get some of the pieces developed first, and then just win with your big lead in development. Using the fact that, for example, after e6, the bishop on f8, and the rook on h8 are not really in the game here, which is a big problem for black. And actually, this is what happened in the game, where after knight takes d4, which, okay, it's a losing move, but it's kind of instructive to see why. Because actually only 2 good moves for white at this point. One of them is to move bishop to b5, but the better move is to move pawn to f7, where obviously king d7 would hang the knight, so bishop f7 is forced. And the finisher showed his very good calculation with queen takes f7, realizing that, of course, king d7 is clearly hopeless, but after king f7, now white actually has a checkmate in 3, and again I invite you to pause the video to see if you can find this checkmate yourself with white to play. Okay, well done if you came up with the move knight at e5. Obviously, if the king were to retreat, diagonal piece on f7 is going to be checkmate. But in the game after king f6, white played bishop at g5 check. Pawn at g5 will come to the same thing. King takes e5. And then bishop e to f4 checkmate. So quite a short game, but a very model example of how to play against this 94 Alekhine. I think games like this kind of show why, even though the 94 line has worked for me as a surprise weapon, against good players, white just gets too big of an advantage and a very strong attack. So anyway, I'm glad that you enjoyed the game. Do make sure to leave a like for this video if you use anything new that you learned while watching this one. And also subscribe to keep up to date with more of my Grandmaster chess videos. So good luck in your next Crazyhouse games, and I'll see you in the next video.